video, we're going to be looking at metaphors and deciphering what is meant by them when they've been used in a sentence. This is an area that some of you have said that you find a little bit difficult, so hopefully this video will help you out. First of all, what's a metaphor? It's a descriptive writing feature, and we often see them in poems and stories. And it uses a word or phrase to describe something as if it were something else. Here's an example. The athlete was a flash of lightning on the track. As part of your reading comprehension skills, it's important that you actually understand what the writer means by this. And in this case, the athlete was a flash of lightning on the track. The writer means that the athlete is running extremely quickly. It doesn't mean that an actual bolt of lightning is taking part in the race. It's describing the pace of the athlete, not what is actually taking part. So you can see how we can make misconceptions when we're interpreting metaphors, and you need to look for that descriptive meaning. Really think about, what does the writer want me to understand here? I've got another example. A wave of panic swept over the crowd. Now here's an illustration that somebody thinks describes that metaphor. A wave of panic swept over the crowd, but it's not actually right. So what's wrong with the image? Well, the metaphor is actually describing the feeling of alarm or trepidation that passes through the crowd. It's not actually describing that a wave is actually sweeping through the crowd. Look in the explanation here how I haven't repeated the word panic. I've actually used some synonyms, alarm and trepidation. Both of them mean panic or nervousness, and I've used that in my explanation there to show that I really understand what that metaphor actually means. Next, we're going to have a bit of a quiz to see what your understanding of metaphors is. And for each metaphor, you're going to decide which is the correct explanation. I'm going to show you a series of metaphors and definitions, and you're going to pick which explanation describes the metaphor best. You're only going to need a piece of paper and a pencil to jot down your answers, and your answers are simply going to be A or B. So pause the video while you go and get a piece of paper and a pencil. Let's have a look at our first metaphor then. For the first few, I've got some pictures to help you out. So here's the metaphor to go with this image. Its wings were a fluttering sunset against the lush green forest. Here are the explanations. The wings of the butterfly moved like the sun sinking below the horizon. Or B, the wings of the butterfly are bright and vibrant in colour. Look again at the metaphor. Its wings were a fluttering sunset against the lush green forest. Which is the best explanation, A or B? Take a minute to think. What did you think? Well, we need to look that the sunset is describing the wings, and it's actually describing the vibrancy of the colour of the wings. Sunsets are bright orange quite often, and they're vibrant and bright in colour. A sunset wouldn't really be used to describe movement. It would be used to describe colour. So B would be the best explanation to describe what this metaphor means. Moving on to our next one. We've got an image of a chimpanzee. Here's the metaphor that's been put with it. Her eyes were saucers peering through the foliage. Now, does this describe that her eyes were wide and round, or her eyes were big and round? Think carefully about this one. How did you get on? Now, we know that saucers are round, and in both explanations it mentions the roundness of her eyes. But does it describe the size, or does it describe that they were wide? Which one describes it best? Well, saucers aren't renowned for being big, so her eyes were wide and round is probably the best explanation for this particular metaphor. So A would be your answer. In our next one, we've got a tree with some water in the background. And here's the metaphor that's being put with it. The branches were long, crooked fingers that tickled the water below. Now, does this mean that A, the branches were very long and they could reach the water, or B, the twisted branches hung down with the tips touching the water? What do you think? Which one describes the metaphor best? Let's see if we thought the same then. So, in the first one, it describes that the branches were long, which would be like fingers, and they could actually reach the water. Tickled the water below would suggest that the branches are actually reaching into the water. But in B, it describes the twisted branches hung down with the tips touching the water. I think B explains it best, because twisted shows that you understand what the writer means by crooked, and it shows you that by tickling the water below, the tips would be touching the water, not the whole branch. So although both are nearly there, this one is the better explanation. So B would be your answer for that one. The next ones, we're just going to use the metaphor. We're not going to have any pictures. So here we've got the bird's feathers were rays of light as it flew into the distance. Now, does it mean that A, the bird's feathers contained flashes of white or yellow which could be seen as it flew? Or does it mean that the sunlight could be seen through the bird's feathers as it flew away? What do you think? Jot down A or B. So we know that birds' feathers aren't actually made with rays of light. But does it mean that the sunlight could be seen through the bird's feathers, or does it suggest the colour of the bird's feathers? I would say A. It suggests that the bird's feathers contained flashes of white or yellow, which could be seen as it opened its wings to fly away. It doesn't actually mean that the sunlight could be seen through them. Last one. His dustbin-lid hands scooped up the presents in one. Does this suggest that A, his hands were made of metal, or B, his hands were large? What do you think, A or B? Let's see how you got on with that one then. Now, his dustbin-lid hands scooped up the presents in one. Now, in this metaphor, it suggests that there's quite a lot of presents. So to be able to do that in one, I would say that your hands would need to be large. Not literally that this person's hands were actually made of metal. So what the writer is trying to suggest here is that the person that picked up these presents had large hands to be able to scoop them up in one. I hope that's given you a better understanding of metaphors and why they're actually used by writers in poems and stories. Look out for metaphors in your own reading books. If you find a metaphor and you come across one, copy it down into your reading record and explain what it means. This will be a good way to demonstrate to your teachers what you understand by that particular metaphor, and it will also help your reading comprehension skills. I hope it helps, and thanks for watching.